downtown, and it's like, it's going to be miserable tonight there. But Joe Engler there, besides being on our board, he's big time in history locally there. You probably all at one time or another looked at his website, Historic Evansville. You want to know where some buildings that used to be. There's a place to look. There tonight, he's going to take us on a tour of downtown there. And you got your spots, and then what, along the way, anything else? Yeah, just check it out. There. So again, thank you for coming tonight.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. You good? All right, we're gonna try this. I've never been mic'd up before, so hopefully it won't get screechy on us.
We're not sure. I'm gonna have to figure out where to be.
So again, we'll take our tour. We'll head downtown to the old part of town, and I'll kind of put everything in context of how it used to be. Probably not 200 years ago, because 200 years ago it was probably a lot of log cabins, a lot of animals running wild, and there's not a whole lot in there. We'll probably focus on like the 1850s. There's not obviously many buildings left from that era, so we'll kind of have to imagine. If you do have a phone, on the Facebook event and also on historicevansville.com, under like I think publications, you can get to the slides that I'm talking about. And if you don't have them now, you can always get on it later, and my email's on there, so there'll be kind of a little bit of summary about this. But thanks for coming. This is a great turnout. Probably the largest crowd I've had. I'm not gonna lie, and that's surprising because I've done a brewery tour, a brewery walking tour. But we'll keep those out. Again, we try and do these walks a lot. I like doing them. I like talking about this stuff and kind of finding the historic things that you kind of just drive by every day and don't think about. So we'll start here, and then we'll walk about a couple blocks in between and just space it from there. But 200 years ago, Evansville was founded in 1812. The state, Indiana becomes a state in 1816. And at that time, obviously we were in the spot. At that time, Warwick County actually encompassed us and Posey County, all three of us together. So when Evansville was founded, it was very centrally located. And obviously, being a county seat had its advantages. So Evansville was kind of in the driver's seat for being a big leader in the area. Well, not soon after, Posey County split off in half, and we were off center. We were almost literally between the border between the two of them. And because of that, I guess it was kind of up in the air how this would shake out. But in 1818, Vanderbilt County was established, and that's our 200th birthday today, this year. And that's kind of what's generating a lot of these events we're having. But coincidentally, when Vanderbilt was mapped out, we were right in the middle again, and lo and behold, we were a county seat, and that kind of helped secure Evansville's growth. The original boundaries of the city were from Riverside to 3rd Street, from Court Street to about Chestnut Street. And obviously it wasn't a firm boundary, that's just what they platted out, and houses grew up. In the 1856 map, you can see it's on the picture here. Even then, it had expanded a little bit up to maybe even 8th Street, a little wider. But there wasn't much growth past the canal or west of Pigeon Creek. That happened, probably 1860s and later. When Evans was selected as the end of the Wabash and Erie Canal, that's when things started happening. That cemented our prosperity and really drove a lot of the growth. And we'll talk about a little about that later. Now we're going to take a walk. We're going to go to about Riverside and Walnut. So we'll turn this off for a while and just follow along. Obviously, you get a feel of the riverfront here and how Evansville used to look probably originally. I find it very interesting. If anybody ever been to Charleston or Savannah, and I'm sure there's any other town, they really have this drop-down feel, and there's literally like a row of like buildings that you feel like are almost not sunk down, but they're in the river, on the coast there. And I think it's amazing to think that that's really how Evansville used to kind of be. We'll go to a couple spots, but you can see a lot of these streets when you come down from First, it drops down, and because when they built the levee, it went back up. So imagine just that gradual descent down, and that's really how it approached the river. Back in 1848, they graded the wharf, the little area here, and then they established a wharf boat. So they have a kind of like a floating boat, almost like kind of how the LST works, where it's a floating spot. The boats would come up to it, and then they could actually get them off of there, and then they were connected to dry land, so these boats didn't have to dock and take off every time. But P.J. O'Reilly was the wharf master. That was an actual title, and he ran that. There actually was a couple other spots in town where they could get in and unload their freight. Another thing that was really common on the waterfront too was you had all these hotels for travelers. You had people coming in the river and staying for a night and moving on. And there was quite a few hotels just around here. A lot so on the riverfront. In fact, that's actually what spurred the Marine Hospital that we had here. It wasn't Marines necessarily anything to do with the military. It was more just Marine, like maritime travel. So with all the traffic here, that spurred the growth of the old Marine Hospital, if I recall that one. The ramp here was graded even through like the early 1930s. Around 1936, that's when they decided to redo it and build a plaza, more of a riverfront esplanade or something. And of course, no sooner than they built it the next year, 1937, it was tested by one of the largest floods we've ever had, and it was underwater. But there's a lot of neat old photos with the water, high water getting near or really close to the buildings. And of course, the 37 was pretty intense, and a lot of even got damaged from that. And that's where we lost a lot of the old buildings that were on the riverfront. In fact, actually, it used to be called, instead of Riverside Drive, it was Water Street. It was upper water and lower water, depending on where you were in town. But again, like I said, you really get a feel for how, the ties that it had to the city. The river just really brought a lot. There's some other towns, I think Mount Vernon, they're trying to do some things, but a lot of these towns, when they had the flood, they built these flood walls. And here, the thing that kind of founded these towns and brought, business and life and people to it, it was isolated from it. And in some ways, there's not nearly as much need as there used to be for that stuff. So it's kind of a contrast to how, what started the town. But, it's good to see a lot of these, just for the beauty of it. They're doing a lot more trails and stuff and kind of throwing back to, what got Evansville, why they picked it here in the first place. You can see this huge, they call it an oxbow or a crescent. Sometimes they'll call us the Crescent City, but it's like a big horseshoe. And that's, like I said, gets a lot of traffic and a lot of visibility. And really downtown is squared kind of off of the turn there. So it seems this view, if you ever look at it from a map, but it's pretty square to how the river's been. One more note before we walk on. The Hottie Shrine over here, it was originally the Gilbert Sanitarium. It was built in 1910. There's an old hospital that's actually still standing near Deaconess. And they had a little hospital here that only lasted a little bit. In 1933, that's when it became the Hottie Shrine. We're going to cross, that was our largest stretch here. We're going to cross here at Walnut, and then hopefully we'll be a little safe and a lot more stops and a lot less fun. I have these slides on Facebook, the event, and also on the website. If you got your smartphone, you can pull them up to see these old pictures. Right behind you guys on this little half block here, the Sherwood House opened in 1837 as the city's largest hotel. It was a 43-room building. Marcus Sherwood was the proprietor. It was remodeled in 1895, and a corner tower was added. It was rebranded as the Randall. Again, it was an older structure, so by the time, Evansville really started growing, it was pretty dated. That's why they tried to remodel it, but it didn't last that long. If anybody recalls what was here?
Elks Club.
The Elks Club? Yeah, there was the Elks Lodge. It was built in 1904. It was this really amazing building. If you can get online and find pictures of it. It had these cool columns, really, I think, yellow brick and rounded. It was a theater club that caught fire, and they put it out in the middle of winter, and there's like these crazy icicles when it burned down. It's kind of a neat thing. Regarding the hotel, again, it was the largest in town until before the McCurdy. In 1874, there was a St. George Hotel. It was a really grand hotel as well, large. And it just, it lasted for several years. It was probably the most popular one in town after that. And then again in the 1914, 16, it was deemed old and dated, and they tore it down and built the McCurdy. So, and as another note, catty corner from here, imagine the street's still there. There was actually an opera house, the old Evansville Opera House in 1868. It burned down in a fire in 1891.
The Kearny Hotel, built in 1916, 1918. Prior to that was the St. George Hotel. St. George Hotel was prior to that, large, magnificent structure before that time, but it was outdated. So they built the McCurdy. McCurdy's still standing. They just remodeled it. It has a popular room up top called the Rose Room, and it was one of the best dance floors and best floors in the whole city.
Get ready. If you look, you can really see what I was talking about. You know, all these, obviously Main Street used to be a lot more lined, but you can see the road, how it's dipping down, and then with the advent of the riverfront drive there, you can see it just kind of goes back up. But you really start to get a feel for how things just kind of start descending down into the riverfront. So again, Main Street's right here. You can we'll kind of go up and down Main Street a little bit, but you get there were obviously a lot of shops. You know, Main Street USA. There's always a lot of things going on Main Street. Lots of activity, lots of neat old photos showing all those businesses. Some of the later blocks, there's still a lot of those older buildings left. A lot on this side of 2nd Street are just kind of gone. They actually clear cut a lot of this in an effort to spur vitalization, but obviously it took a while. But now we're starting to get some new development down here. Behind us here, really 1st Street all the way down here. Oh, okay, that was good. This was originally the Wholesale District. You had just tall 3 to 5 story brick buildings, just up and down. It had a big city, and they weren't like, you know, standard brick facades. They were all ornate and fancy, arched windows, lots of limestone. And there's probably a strategic reason that you have this proximity to the river. So you can imagine if you're unloading all this stuff and you don't have machines, or you know, you're stuck using animals or labor, that you're going to be close to the riverfront. You know, a lot of these warehouses were here. They would store a lot of that supplies there, just load them from the riverfront, and then they would distribute them to the stores around town. Obviously, different parts of the area. But some of the old photos you can actually see down this street. I think there's still a few of the outbuildings there, but Vulcan Plow was there. If anybody recalls that big statue, it's in the museum. It was originally Highland Plow, but they had a big Vulcan statue of one of the gods on the corner. It was really neat. And a little farther up, kind of this way, was the old Mesker Steel. So you get here and you have a lot of the wholesale, the businesses, and the farther you got that way, it actually got even almost a little residential. The WNIN, the old building there, was a carpenter house, and obviously that was the nicer one in town. That was built 1848. But you get a lot past there, and there's a lot of smaller housing. A lot of that was cleared out during redevelopment as well. So behind you guys over here, we have the old Customs House and Post Office. A lot of people just think it's a post office. Ohio River traffic actually earned Evansville a port of entry status. Kind of literally customs, where people go in and declare, you know, I don't know what, but because of that, they had a customs house here. It was built by the federal government. They started building in 1873, but an economic depression, a bunch of other delays happened, and it wasn't completed until 1879. What's really interesting, I've got a photo of the original one, but you can see this back section here. There's 2 wings on both sides. Those were added back in 1916, and they're almost identical to the original. They're really hard to tell between the two, which is pretty impressive. If they tried building an addition now, it'd probably look pitiful. But the roof, you know, it really matches well, so that's a kind of a testament to the work on that. Sadly, it was abandoned in 1969, probably about the time they moved to the new federal buildings there on Civic Center. The city finally acquired it from the federal government in the 1977. The old post office plaza was served small businesses. If anybody recalls, like Greeley's used to be in there. A couple restaurants, a couple things, smaller businesses, and just recently it's been converted kind of into Events Plaza. We've had a couple receptions there. It's a pretty nice little setup. They built the post office square behind it, and I believe the new construction they're doing is called the Post House. I think they're kind of giving a tribute to the old post office. It's got a name that has post in it, so they're not making things up. Kind of across behind here, where the YWCA was, there was a Vine Street Presbyterian Church. We'll talk about it a little bit, but it dates back to 1843, and it was raised in the early 1900s when they built the YWCA. We've got a good vantage point here. About halfway up the block behind Sonatrol, there was a old German Methodist church built in 1846. They tore it down, and it was one of the, they actually repurposed it as one of the first hose houses in town, fire stations. And I think in the 1880s, they tore it down and built a newer, nicer one, and I think that lasted until about 1960. The church up there with the cross, if you see it, that's Holy Trinity. It was a very gorgeous church, built in 1850. It was one of the oldest Catholic churches in town. It actually caught fire Palm Sunday? April Sunday. It was right around Easter, 1950. And it was really sad. My grandma was actually going to get married there and had to get married somewhere else. But there was also the parking lot by it. There was a corresponding church there, or excuse me, a school there, Holy Trinity School, and it was actually the predecessor to Memorial. The kids would go to high school there. The Catholic kids would go to high school there, and then they finally built Memorial School in the 20s. And also on the corner here, kind of behind the post office, there was the old Courier Press. If anybody recalls that building, it was kind of a neat building, 1930s Art Deco style. Kind of reminds you of the Greyhound bus station a little bit. And then obviously the old courthouse and jail date back to the 1890s. We'll keep moving. If you guys have any questions, throw them out. I'll stick around at the end. Yes?
Only the boys went to this.
That's correct. I forgot, yeah. I think did they have a grade school for both? In fact, like St. Mary's had different buildings for the boys and girls. St. Anthony's did at one point, so.
The high school for girls was at Sunset.
Okay. You learned something new?
And we're standing on Acme Cigar Store. Acme Hotel was right here. Quit about 1956, and across the street was a very important building.
Businessmen's, yeah.
Yeah, good point. The businessman, Tom reminded me, Brownie, right?
Yeah.
He reminded me the Businessmen's Association was across the street here. Really large scale building. Again, you got the 3-4 story brick buildings, or stone actually. The Grand Hotel was next to it. The Vendome Hotel was just a little bit beyond there. They're a little bit more modern as far as what we're talking about, but even like the Acme Cigar, I think my grandma worked there at one point as well. But just lots of history around here. Quite a few buildings standing, but they obviously, sometimes you have 3 or 4 buildings past the original ones that you have now. So, all right, we'll continue on. I'm impressed. Yeah. Okay, without reading it, where you're standing now was the little church on the hill. There literally was probably a nice gentle hill to it. There wasn't a huge hill downtown, but that's what it was nicknamed. In 1932, it was Evansville's first church building. There's a photo of it on here, if you can see it. That's more the log cabin style. On the slideshow, I've got a picture of a newer photo of it. And I say newer, like 1860s. I don't have the year here, but at some point it became the new school. The Presbyterian church split. They had a schism. There was an old school and a new school. This is the new school. If you recall the Vine Street Presbyterian I just mentioned a while back, that was the old school. So they kind of had a difference in how to run their churches, and there you go. This church, they ended up building, the brick one there, the Gathering, they ended up building on Walnut Street in 1863. This stood for a while. I'm not sure what it was necessarily used for. We had a whole lot of reuse, but it was raised in around 1885. Coincidentally, the two that split apart, they would end up back together at First Presbyterian on Mulberry Street. A couple blocks. If I can see it there, yeah, they're really tall. Yeah, it was really Grace Presbyterian, and then when they joined back together in the 1926, they rejoined and took the name First Presbyterian. So it kind of was the First Presbyterian. They split up, and now they're back together. So all is well. I just kind of take us a little jaunt so you can see it. So if you're walking back by here, it's pretty cool to take a look. We're going to head up to Third Main. Back when Evansville was first platted out throughout the streets, they had kind of a offset square here. This kind of had little notches in here to make a bigger courtyard square, and they called it the public square. I believe maybe some of the original buildings might have been offset back, but most of these, they were kind of on the corners like you're seeing now. Behind us on the south corner was the first courthouse. I think it actually mentioned that it was a brick structure, but it didn't last that long. Over here, they built a really substantial one in 1852, and it was nearly complete when a fire broke out in Christmas 1855. So they went back to the ground level. They did finish up using the same plans, and it was completed in 1857. So I like to call on my website the second and third courthouse was right over there. It's a neat picture of it. Again, if you got the slides or look later, you'll see me afterwards. I'll show you the picture. It was a Greek revival style. It had a dome and a column portico. It kind of stood out, like something might seem like the Capitol. It was used until this new courthouse made behind us was built in 1891. Obviously, that's a lot larger. It was torn down, but they did reuse the foundation when they built the Acme block. If you remember, there was quite a few stores there. I think we're down in the 80s, whatever it was. Remember? They repurposed a couple of them. They had some fire damage. I had to tear down like 2 of the 5 segments, and then there was some left, and then they tore that down, and they kind of rebuilt this one more recently. Behind you guys, bleeding, they are the Washington House. This is another building on the Courthouse Square, or the public square. This is an amazing building. How's food? Okay. It opened in 1855. It was one of the finest hotels in Young River City. It was eventually Evansville Commercial College around 1878. It was about the time it acquired a mansard roof. Those other kind of like the angle roofs. It's kind of in that style, like the 1870s. Some of the older pictures, they really had cool windows on as well. But they kind of got boxed in. And if anybody recalls, so it housed a variety of concerns, businesses including Vickery Brothers at one point, M. Ryan, Fine Clothing. It was born and raised in 1910, but they decided to save themselves. But it's still standing. For a long time, a lot of people remember it as a farmer's daughter restaurant. At that time, it was all bricked up and kind of ugly, so they've done a great job restoring it. I think I've emailed the owners a couple times, and they really brought it back to the classic look. Now they got which I brings it. Completing our tour on the public square over here, the Crescent City Bank was built around 1858. I'm not 100% sure this is that same building. It may have been, you get a real simple back there, but they probably definitely decorated it with the stone and the limestone in the tower when it became the German National Bank around 1880s. You see the corner tower. If anybody actually recalls, about 10 years ago, that was bricked up too, and they didn't have any front porches on it, so they've done a good job with that one as well. It was also a business college for a while, and served a lot of things over the years. All right, we're going to keep moving on this way. Built all the stonework on it. You had a lot of these banks moving from the riverfront to these more established, larger, like stone buildings. So you can trust them with your money. I think we'll look at it on more. We've kind of walked pretty much the whole perimeter of downtown. If anybody recalls what was on 5th Street, a few blocks up, do anybody know what used to be on 5th Street? Canal. The Canal used to live there. Wabash and Erie Canal. Again, Evansville was chosen to be the terminus of the new canal in 1834. There was a lot of delays on that one too, but it completed in 1853, and it really didn't last long because it's about the time they finished it, the railroads were really starting to take over. But the economic impact lasted. You had a lot of people investing in Evansville, speculating that it would be a successful town, and that's when really Evansville kind of hit its stride. The canal came in along Canal Street, cleverly named, and then it turned about where Wheeler School was, if you recall where Wheeler was, and then it turned here and went on 5th Street to about where the courthouse was and kind of meandered towards the basket.
St. John's down in their basement, St. John's UCC. There's something to do with the area there.
Yeah, it actually went past there. Okay. It actually went up, I think first near Willard and took a left there at Indiana Street by the Sterling Brewery. And I think I actually stopped dead short, just a little short of the Pigeon Creek. But again, all these, and that's where I was going with it, a lot of these businesses built along the canal, the brewery, some of the mills. Actually here at Locust Street, there was the Eigelhart Brothers Mill. If anybody recalls that one, it was there originally, was stood there. And then they moved out to First Avenue, all people remember that building. And then the original Blanc Plow was down here as well. And again, the failed canal, it would later lead to railroad development. The canal had the flat river, low river that the boats would go on, and then they had a tow path that the horses or whatever mules would pull it along with. And those really flat high spots on the side made for great railroad tracks. So you'll see a lot of it repurposing those tracks out on Morgan Avenue where you had that big gully near like Green River Road. There's part of the old canal there. You can see the ditch, and then the side where the train tracks were was part of the canal too. But anyway, one other thing too, the Locust Street Methodist was the first Methodist church in town. It was near here, 1839. And you can tell the proximity of all these churches. We've gone through a lot of the different ones, all this close in this small area. it would later relocate to the brick building back here, Trinity Methodist, in 1860s, I believe. We'll talk about that in a second. The church was turned into a hotel. I think it was had a new facade on everything. Lottie Hotel, and then it was raised in the 60s for permanent federal. 1910s, they built a police station here. If anybody recalls a long building here, there was a police station there, and they tore down the old one behind the City Hall and expanded in the back. Unfortunately, when the Civic Center came, am I noticing a pattern? In 1969, the Civic Center came, and they all relocated over there, and they tore all these down for parking. So, 71 was the end of that. I believe they did some work to save the clock tower. I don't know that for sure.
One of the clock faces is in our M-Track building.
There you go. Yeah, I knew that. About where you guys are, there was a couple neat old buildings. If you recall a name or email me, the Bear Building and the Melbourne Flats, a bunch of neat old residential. You're starting in the residential area here. The police station I mentioned was about 1915. We'll kind of hook over there. Trinity Methodist, 1866. Again, that's where Locust Street came. Your addition to the side, they tore down some houses here and built the 1925 addition. A little kind of past here, closer to Welborn. 3rd and 4th, and I believe Mulberry, was the old Wheeler School. It was a Canal Street school. It's about where the canal turned, and that was the first school built in Evansville, 1855. I think 70. Yeah, I think for a while it actually ended up being a colored school for a little bit because they did some resegregation and stuff, and I think when they consolidated and had the thing to kind of segregate the schools, that's when they kind of abandoned it and tore it down. So it's a parking lot now.
Trinity Methodist, built in the Civil War, in the addition 1925 to the left, the Masonic Temple being rejuvenated, and over there the Goga, that's where the Goga Tabernacle was, behind it the Baptist Church, but Rake, one of the most popular preachers in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, called it Goga Tabernacle. Great big basketball stadium there. It's torn down. It's right where the yellow building is.
Here you're starting to get into the residential area. You get a feel for, obviously a lot of it's gone now, but you're starting to get more churches, more residential location. Behind me is the Owen Block. It's 1882, so it's a little newer, but it actually replaced an old First Cumberland Presbyterian Church. And if anybody recalls the Scottish Rite, they actually built next door in the 1870s, and that was a church. If you could imagine the front off of there, that big stone front, and you could see along the sides, I kind of wish it was still there, but it had a lot of bricks. It had like those little spires, I don't know what they call them, like ribs or something on the side. Everything about it screamed church except for the front. And you could really see it once you looked at it. But it was built in 1876. In 1909, it became the Scottish Rite, and then the front was put on there about 1965, and then they raised it just last year, I believe. Again, the Owen Block. Up here ahead, you'll see the Rites home. Everyone knows that one, 1872. It's a little newer. It's got that French Second Empire, the mansard roof we talked about with the slanted roof. Our kids actually just went on a tour. It was pretty cool. But 1944 was actually the Catholic bishop's residence. And in the 1970s, that's when it turned back into the Rites Home Museum. Behind us here actually is a really neat one too. I didn't have any notes on it, but I think it was one of the first ones that they kind of, saved and turned into like a business. You're kind of getting where the business growth comes in here. And I think they turned it into a attorney office, and they've done a good job just keeping it intact. It doesn't have to be a house necessarily, as long as they're taking care of it. That's kind of the motto I've got.
The woodwork inside is gorgeous.
I love the zoo.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Next to it.
Park, the namesake. That was his home. It actually dates back to 1858. It's one of the ones. If anyone does recall, there was a bed and breakfast. I stood there after we got married.
Other side of the Rites Home?
Mm-hmm. The White House. I think it was white. Yeah, it's the white. The little tall porch columns. Behind us here, the Stone Church, St. Paul Episcopal, a really pretty church. It dates back to 1839. Again, you've got this real tight concentration of different denominations of church. It actually had an older structure. This one was built in 1886 on the same spot. We built this nice stone one. It actually caught fire in 1938, but I believe in the photos they built it pretty darn identical to how it looks. So that's kind of amazing. Shows the dedication. did you actually get a chance over there at the cornerstone? I believe this is addition, so we're kind of pointing that out. It's a little more modern. It's stone. This is the oldest extant building in town, this house. 313 to 315 Southeast First. It's a duplex. You can see it kind of has that row house feel where they're, I think in my photo, they're actually different colors, different tones. Look out. It was a federal style built in the late 1830s. It dates back quite a ways. Thomas Stockwell and Reverend Joseph Wheeler, possibly tied to the church, I guess, were the first ones to occupy the duplex way back in the day. This one I don't know much. I don't have it. It's a Nisbet house. It actually I think was I think that uses like a fraternal club in the 20s, but it's a really nice example of a house. But it's really neat. All right, we'll move on. Behind me, again, you have a lot of these. We're in the heart of the residential area. We're actually, you can imagine the premier location. You race the museum. Sorry, Tom, you race the museum. Awesome view of the riverfront. In fact, we'll talk about it in a second. You have a lot of these old houses. You know, you've got great access to stuff downtown, especially these business owners. They were close to their businesses. They could attend to them, make sure their owners, their employees were working hard. Behind me, excuse me if I say it wrong, the Bailey House in 1855. He was a wholesale grocer. In the 1870s, they added the Second Empire style. The mansion roof was a lot simpler before. This one's kind of a newer infill, 1910s. The next one down, Raleigh House, it was 1868, remodeled in 1893. I did hear that actually is going to become a residence soon, so that's good news. The yellow one on the corner, I believe, is now a bed and breakfast. The Veneman House, he was another wholesaler, had lots of money on his business. He was 1870s. You can't see it too up from here, but there's really another old one across the street, the Babcock Walker, 1854. Again, it was modernized in 1873. This one on the other side here, I kind of got us out of the way, but the green one, it's got the front porch. 1863, the Gilbert home. Around 1900, they did a porch model, but I think that's about the same time they converted it into apartments. I've heard that it's going to save it. I don't know what they're doing with it. That's always good news. And actually, across from us, if you have the slides, I updated the slides here this afternoon. There was another really neat house across the way, the Barnes Mansion. In the 1830s, it dates back a long time. Pretty much right down where this part of the museum was. Elisha Harrison, he ran the Evansville Gazette newspaper. A gentleman named Robert Barnes bought it, enlarged it, I think, kind of modernized it a little bit. It has what they call it, the widow's walk, square thing on the top, kind of like it's a dome. There's a good picture of it again on his website, but he owned it for a long time. He was one of the founders of Evansville National, but it later became Old National. Ewell Armstrong, he was the owner of the Armstrong Furniture Company. He had it in the 1880s. And actually in the 1904, it became the first Evansville Museum. It was an old house. They had a lot of exhibits in there. And around 1910, a lot of these neighbors started complaining about their view being blocked. And it wasn't very long after that it was deemed unsafe and they tore it down. The artifacts were scattered in different spots, and then obviously at some point later down the road it found its home again here at the Evansville Museum, I believe. Tom, what year are you? Do you know what year is the museum? 50s?
Oh, this about 59.
59. So around 59, that's when it kind of came back home to its original spot. But the mansion was really kind of neat. If you look at old maps, it really sticks out right there on the riverfront. We're in a cool position here too. If you can imagine, you got the pagoda there and Sunset Park, but take this line straight this way on Water Street, Riverside Drive, and it goes straight. And the park just expanded almost all the way down there to the Kids Kingdom. Huge park. So they had a great view. They had lots of privacy. They had river views. They called it Sunset Park because at the time it sunsets on the river. Beautiful. In fact, it was such a desirable location that that's when, about 1910s, they built Sunset Drive. And it used to just kind of tee here, the houses that are facing us, and then it hooked that way, Sunset Drive. Again, there's kind of a park on the opposite side of there where some of our friends live. This whole thing was a park, huge. And Sunset Drive kind of cut into it a little bit, but then when they built the Veterans Memorial Parkway here in like the 60s that they tore down a house there on the corner, and it really kind of bisected the park. But you get a feel for what people had nothing to do. They were all, you saw how compact they were in the city here, so they got here and they had all this space. They could run around and do things. There actually was an older waterworks building here, and then they moved down there like around 1900 and before then. But again, you got to the residential part. We've kind of been through really where Evansville was in the 1850s. I encourage you guys to look on the site. We've got a lot of old photos. You stick around, email me, ask questions. I love to stick around and talk about this stuff. We've had a great turnout, so thanks guys. Be safe hitting across the